And now it's time to wrap up this Eddsworld retrospective with the final episode of the Eddsworld Legacy season, The End. Now this is going to be pretty interesting because I was actually fortunate enough to work on this episode. Billy and I worked together to contribute the flashback sequence for part 1 and the post-credit sequence for part 2. So to make this a more fair review, I won't be talking about either of those scenes. Now as an Eddsworld Legacy finale, does it go out with a bang? Well, sort of. I mean, it's not bad, but it's not great either. Alright, let's look at the story. Part 1 begins with the return of Tord, something I wasn't really too excited about, but I guess is pretty fitting. The rest of the episode is the guys recreating moments from episodes Tord wasn't in, and just putting him in there. As a fan, this is one of my favorite parts of the episode, just seeing all these moments from some of my favorite episodes be recreated in Paul's amazing animation style, with some great music from Todd Bryanton and Ken Ashcorp to back it up. And I can even remember Todd's music this time. Just a shame it's not as good in part 2. Speaking of which, Tom gets fed up with having Tord push him around again, so he decides to find his own place, leading to part 2 where we see him pretty much homeless now. At the same time, we find out something interesting about Tord. Turns out he's actually a bad guy who only came back to use his giant robot to take over the world. What? Okay, why is Tord suddenly a bad guy now? We see that he's been working with Paul and the other guy, but were they bad guys too? We saw them shooting down zombies in Fun Dead, so they probably weren't. Did Tord just go rogue? When did he find the time to build this giant robot? Did the other guys ever find out about it? How could he just leave it behind? Wouldn't it have made more sense to leave, build the giant robot, and then come back? And why does Tord suddenly have the voice of Commander Bai? I'm not kidding, that's the same actor.
Greetings, Pinkskin! I am Commander Bai. I hope you don't mind me letting myself in.
These are just some of the questions that ran through my head while I was watching part 2 for the first time. Well, except for that last one, but this ultimately leads to the end's biggest problem. All of these questions are never answered. At least in part 2, because part 1 is more of a reunion between the guys and Tord. Part 2 is where it tries to tell a bigger story, but instead of answering questions, it's like, look, a giant robot! Look at all the explosions! Look at how badly they're getting hurt! Isn't that awesome? And visually it is, but it's like watching Batman and Superman fight in Dawn of Justice. It's cool, but if the reason why they're fighting doesn't mean anything, the fight itself isn't quite as impactful as it should be. That's not to say the end doesn't have interesting ideas, because it does. At first it seemed like Tord was trying to replace Tom, which would make sense because of how much they hated each other, and while I'm not a huge fan of Tord being a bad guy, if anything it seems kind of disrespectful to the real Tord, I like the idea of him being an inventor. But even though I appreciate how much Tom and Eddie tried to tell a big story to close out the Legacy season, most of their ideas, particularly in part 2, feel kind of underwhelming. The climax especially. The tension seems to come more from betrayal, and while I can respect that, I think it would have benefited from a bigger threat than just Tord trying to fly away in a giant robot. And this was something I complained about with Spaceface and to an extent the Snoger, but I can't help but feel like Tom gets a little too much focus. Him being pushed aside by Tord and moving out to find his own place would make a really neat subplot, but in part 2 it's front and center. And I don't like that Tord doesn't go through a redemption after he's defeated. He stays a bad guy instead of owning up to his mistakes and wanting to be good again. This could have made for a nice moment with Ed reflecting on their time together. But nope, Tom is the center of attention, he deals the finishing blow, and Tord doesn't make amends with them. I'm sorry, it just doesn't sit well with me. I should mention though that apparently this is supposed to be an allegory for Tom dealing with Ed's cancer coming back. That might be pretty interesting for something not Eddsworld related, but it still doesn't work for me here. And having Tord represent Ed's cancer is even more disrespectful to him. Alright, I wasn't expecting to go on that much about this episode, but moving more toward the positive side, how great is the animation in these videos? Part 1 was the last episode Paul ever animated on his own, and it's probably his best work yet. The way the characters move looks a bit stiffer than something like Fun Dead, but it's nowhere near as bad as Salunatics. The backgrounds look phenomenal, most of them being drawn by Temmie Chang, who also worked on Undertale. She's a terrific artist, but again, like in Salunatics, it's really weird to see Undertale references in an Eddsworld episode. Also, some of the background characters look a little weird too. Part 2 was a huge collaborative effort between a whole bunch of other animators, including Billy and myself. And this one goes for more of a visual nod to Ed's style. While some animators get it pretty close, others like Zurl and Wanchop are a bit off. They all do a phenomenal job nonetheless, and Zurl especially was perfect for the climax. He just gets movement in action sequences really well. In the end, no pun intended, this episode had a lot of promise and just barely lives up to the hype, at least for me. It's kinda sad that for an episode that's supposed to be this big grand finale, I just think it's okay. Correction, part 1 is great, part 2 is just okay. It relies a lot on nostalgia and feels instead of focusing on the actual plot, and because of that, it's all the more frustrating when it doesn't explain elements of the story that clearly need to be explained. And on the whole, it just leaves a lot to be desired. But I have to give it this. It's clear that a significant amount of effort was put into it. Tom and Eddie have a true understanding and respect for the show's past, and despite the story being ultimately disappointing, they did whatever they could to get this story told. That reminds me a lot of how dedicated Ed was to make the show in the first place. Not all of his work was perfect, but that doesn't matter. He only did what he did because he cared a lot about making his fans happy. The End, in that sense, kind of represents that, along with the other Legacy episodes. None of them were masterpieces by any means, but despite how we may feel about them, we got them because Tom and Eddie knew it's what Ed would have wanted. He wanted the show to keep going after his death because he knew a lot of people loved it. Tom and Eddie did what they could to fulfill his wish, and I've got to applaud them for their efforts. At this point, it's not sure if the end is really the end, but if Eddsworld should return at some point in the future, I'll be sure to tune in right away. And here's hoping we as Edheads can help keep his world spinning, without harassing people to the point of them seemingly disappearing off the face of the earth. Thanks for tuning in to my Eddsworld retrospective, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye!
Eddsworld.
Eddsworld.